Hello, we're going to walk through a demo of the adaptive solution. We'll first start from the end user point of view, and then from there we'll transition over and show how the solution is administered. So here I'm going to log into a Windows 10 workstation. I'm going to type in I have my username already typed in, provide my password. Now, the agent that's configured on this machine is talking to the Idaptive Cloud service, and it's retrieving the various multi-factor authentication mechanisms that are associated with this particular user's account. We have our mobile authenticator for this particular user, oath OTP, email, SMS text, a security question, or a phone call in this particular example. Other factors include, for example, YubiKey and radius. And we could spend more time on this a little bit later on in the demonstration. So we'll go ahead and select our mobile authenticator. And then over on the left, we have a screen replay of the iOS device that's sitting on my desktop. And if you notice on the iOS device, the user gets a notification for a multi-factor authentication. All the user needs to do here is tap approve. In addition, we have a policy enabled that's going to require the user to provide a Face ID or thumbprint, depending on what your device supports. And if you notice back over on the right, after we tapped approve and provided my thumbprint, the user didn't need to type in a one-time passcode or anything like that on the workstation. The workstation is automatically logged in. So now we're logged into our Windows 10 machine. The next thing I'm going to do is launch a browser and go to the Idaptive User Portal. What you're going to see, or better yet, what you're not going to see, is another login prompt here. So we have a feature that's enabled called Zero Sign-On, or ZSO. By virtue of the fact that I did a multi-factor authentication to the workstation, you can enable this policy because it's probably not necessary to challenge your users yet again for another multi-factor authentication challenge. Just allow the user in because they've already just completed a multi-factor authentication to the OS. So now we're looking at the Idaptive User Portal. We see a number of application tiles. These tiles are associated with me based on the roles that I have within the service. Idaptive employs a role-based access control mechanism to control what applications I'm allowed to access. So for instance, and then based on that, all I need to do is double-click on one of these applications, and I get single sign-on access right into, for example, in this case, Office 365. So we'll go ahead and close O365, and I'll attempt to do what I notice here actually is that there's one particular application that's missing. In this case, it's Salesforce. So let's go ahead and do an application access request. So I'll type in Salesforce and hit request, provide some sort of business justification, and then I could select the access request type, meaning are we going to permanently assign the rights, or perhaps I don't need this particular application on a permanent basis, but on a time-delimited basis, so we can make it a windowed-based access request. So in this particular example, let's just go ahead and make this a permanent request. I hit submit, and now behind the scenes, Idaptive is calculating the approval workflow. Who are the individuals that are responsible for making a decision in terms of whether or not the requester should have access to Salesforce. The approver in this case is the requester's manager. And if you notice over on the left, the requester's manager gets a notification on his iPad to make a decision in terms of whether or not we want to approve or decline access for that particular request. In addition to a notification on the iPad, you could also send an email to the approvers within your workflow chain. So here I'm going to just tap approve. And if you recall a moment ago, the requester had made this a permanent access request. We're going to do what is in effect a line item veto, where we'll make this, instead of a permanent request, we'll make this a windowed request. And We'll just say, hey, after the next couple of days, we will automatically revoke the requester's rights to Salesforce or to the requested application. Now, in a moment or two, I'm going to change hats and go back to the end user's user portal view. We'll see the Salesforce tile appear over here. Or we could just quickly hit reload rights. The user does not need to log out and log back in or refresh the browser. If we waited a little bit longer, the Salesforce tile, as you see right here, automatically appears. Here I could just click on Salesforce, and in this particular example, we have an additional policy that's enabled that says, for Salesforce, let's intervene and challenge the user with a step-up authentication challenge. So I will go ahead and select the mobile authenticator again, and we'll go back to the end user's iPad, and the end user gets a notification about a multi-factor authentication challenge. And if you notice here, it's a multi-factor request for Salesforce. We tap on approve, provide my thumbprint. No need to type in a one-time passcode or anything like that. And boom, we're into the Salesforce application. Okay, so that was single sign-on into Salesforce. Back to the user portal. So in addition to being a full-featured web single sign-on service, a multi-factor authentication service, built-in, purpose-built for the Idaptive solution is an MDM, or mobile device management solution. One of the things Idaptive recognized early on is that device management and identity management really go hand in hand. And what we enable you to do, what we enable our customers to do, is connect the dots between the device and the person that's using the device. And from that, we could actually start to build on interesting access control policies. So from an end user point of view, at least, if I click from the user portal, I can click on devices, and you see here I have 2 devices that are currently registered with the service. And then from there, I could do a number of different self-service functions. I can reset the passcode on the device, lock the device. If I've misplaced my iPad, I can wipe it as well. So at least, from an end user point of view, those are many of the same capabilities you would see from a pure play MDM provider. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and change hats and switch over to the Idaptive admin console. So when you first go to the Idaptive admin console, it provides you a quick dashboard view, for instance, of who are the users that are logging in, what sort of result has occurred. So if you see on the bottom left, you see the failed logins that have occurred in recent days. You can see from where users have been logging in to this particular tenant environment. So what does risk mean? It's a fairly abstract concept, so let's put that in more concrete terms here. So here what we're looking at is a sample dashboard for our risk analytics engine. And what we're able to do is examine a user's historical or longitudinal behavior profile. And then based on the user's behavioral patterns, we're able to evaluate risk as we encounter various anomalies. So there are a number of different attributes that we're able to examine. Let me maximize this particular element of the dashboard, such as the operating system, geolocation, day of the week, geovelocity. What do we mean by geovelocity? So let's say at 5 o'clock Eastern time from Washington, D.C., I'm logging into the service, and then 10 minutes from now, I'm logging in from Chicago. There's a good chance that I was not able to travel from D.C. to Chicago within 10 minutes. So chances are that's not me logging in, or that is me, but I'm sharing my account inappropriately with someone else. Regardless, it's a high-risk event, so we want to intervene and provide some sort of step-up challenge or even block access outright. How you implement that policy, how you make that risk determination actionable, that's entirely up to you and how you implement those policies. So in addition to geovelocity, we're examining the user's account, time of day, and a variety of other parameters. And based on the user's historical patterns, we look for those anomalies and then arrive at a risk score. So let me just collapse that. So within my particular environment, in the past week, we had 10 security alerts, 7 that are low risk, 3 medium, 0 that are high risk. So again, what we do is our analytics engine derives a risk score. And then from there, what we can do is make that actionable when we go back to the main adaptive admin console. We make that risk determination actionable through a policy such as the one that we're looking at here. Okay, so here's how the connector is represented within the adaptive console. The connector itself is installed. It's a simple Windows service. You click next a handful of times and your connector is up and running. You install it on a Windows machine that's joined to your domain environment. It's an optional component, again, only if you're looking to authenticate your on-prem directory-based users. Adaptive also includes its own cloud-based directory service. But now going back to the connector here, you could take a look at, for example, if we pick on this particular connector, there are a number of different services that it brings to the table. For example, an IWA service. This is what facilitates the web-based proxy capability. The connector also functions as a radius service. So if you have application services that need to perform radius-based multi-factor authentication, such as with your VPN, this is where you go about beginning that configuration process. So that was a very quick overview on how the connector is represented within the adaptive console. So let's shift gears. Now that we understand connectors and how users can authenticate, let's talk a moment about, we'll show the adaptive user directory. And here what we see, if I click on users on the top left, are all the users that have access to this particular environment. And if I sort by source, what we can see here are, if it's an adaptive directory user, these are users that are within your tenant or your customer's tenant's adaptive directory service. Or if it's a federation user, these are users that are coming from another identity provider before they are accessing your customer's adaptive tenant. And then here you see Active Directory-based users. Now, what's also interesting about the adaptive solution and the way we're architected and the magic behind the connector is, let's say you have a variety of different user populations spread across different Active Directory domains, and those domains do not have an Active Directory trust. You can essentially bridge that trust divide by having adaptive connectors defined, configured within those different AD domains. So you see here I have a user within an Active Directory domain called Adaptive Demo. I have another user here within an Active Directory domain called Workspaces Demo. There's no trust relationship at all between those respective Active Directory environments, but all of those disparate users are represented here within the adaptive user admin console. Now, once those users are represented here, now let's talk about role-based access control. And I'll go ahead and let's just go ahead and create a role on the fly here. And we'll call this demo role. And now let's go ahead and populate that role with members. And we can go ahead and add users, groups, roles. We can even add a computer object to a role. And we'll go ahead and search for a user. And here you can see a number of different users that appear. So here we have Gautam Cloud User, and we have different users from different Active Directory domains that we're all going to add to the same role. So you could add users. In addition, you could add groups. So let's say we have a group of users called Office 365. You could add that to your adaptive role. Now, what's really nice about using Active Directory groups within your adaptive roles is you could take advantage of your existing Active Directory group administration process to control which users are members of your adaptive roles. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of how you're going to go about administering adaptive role memberships. All you need to do is just continue doing what you're doing with respect to your Active Directory group administration. So in addition to so now that you have your roles defined, you can apply these roles to control what applications a user has access to. So bring up a web app here. I'll open this up in another tab. And we'll go back and pick on, let's say, Office 365. And under permissions. Now that we have a role defined, all we need to do then is search for that role or that Active Directory group, assign it to the application, and any user that is a member of that particular role or that particular AD group now has access to this particular application. And that's a very quick overview of how we configure role-based access control within the adaptive environment. So certainly one of the most important things about a solution such as adaptives is now that you have your applications and you've got your devices enabled for multi-factor authentication, you're now able to have a centralized view of who is accessing what, who has access to what, and so on. So let's just take a quick, and that makes life very easy in terms of being able to produce reports. Rather than having to go across to disparate applications, you can now drive your reports from one pane of glass. So here we have, there are about 65 some odd reports that are enabled right out of the box with Idaptive. And along with that, you can then define your own reports through our query engine. So just for simplicity, I've already gone ahead and run a failed login user report. So let's say an auditor comes along and says, hey, show me all the users, show me all your failed login attempts, where you're trying to do some sort of root cause analysis and you want to see all the various failed logins that have occurred within your tenant environment. It's a quick, simple report that you can run. That from there, what you can do is you can export the report into a variety of different formats, email your reports, and so on. You can even define delegated administration rules so that specific users can access just the reporting functionality within the Idaptive Admin Console in order to access reports. This report data can also be exposed and accessible, or can be fed into a SIM solution such as Splunk. So if you want to further enrich the data that you're generating through Idaptive and add further value into your SIM implementation, you can use, included with the service, is the ability to take the data that Idaptive is generating and feed that into your SIM solution.